Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone to our program this evening. For those of you in the States, and good morning to those of you joining us from Japan. Our topic tonight is the security situation in North Asia in a post-COVID world. And we have a wonderful moderator and guest panel that I'm sure will generate some interesting insights and questions for our audience. As we are doing a webinar format this evening, please use the question buttons you can see at the bottom. You have a Q&A button that will be used for asking questions. Please take a look now and you can open it up to see how to do it. Questions can be asked and will be viewable only to the panelists. Please note that the chat function has been disabled for this evening. We have a number of questions from our moderator this evening, but we will save some time to get to the audience questions as well. So please ask away. Now, before getting into introductions, I'll start out with a few remarks on the Japan-America Society of St. Louis. With more than a 50-year history in St. Louis, JAS-STL is an all-volunteer society governed by over 20 elected members of the board and has 80 society members, including a number of corporate members, many of which are Japanese-owned corporations with operations in the St. Louis region. Some of these members include Nidec Motor Corporation, which is where I hail from, CSI Leasing, a subsidiary of Tokyo Century Lease, Safety National, a subsidiary of Tokyo Marine Group, Novus, a subsidiary of Mitsui & Company and Nippon Soda, and then Zoltec, a subsidiary of Toray. There's also a number of additional corporations that are members, as well as universities in the region. We thank all of our corporate members for their generous donations. Now, if we move to the next, we have a full agenda of programs throughout the year that focus on cultural, educational, and business exchange. The largest event of the year is the Japanese Festival at the Missouri Botanical Gardens. This is a fantastic event that's visited from all over the United States. We hold also an annual golf fundraiser event for the Japanese Language School, which is a true hidden gem in St. Louis. We offer recurring programs on Ikebana and Chanoyu and facilitate cultural exchanges between Japan and St. Louis. We also are a clearinghouse of information in the St. Louis region for anything Japanese. We'll move on. To facilitate business contacts between Japan and St. Louis, we hold regular Japan updates. You can see some of the past themes from prior Japan updates. Many of you have joined us in the past, and we thank you for your attendance. Now, turning to the theme of the evening, I would like to introduce Peter Kelly, the president of NAJAS, the National Association of Japan-America Societies, to introduce the Geostrategy series and our kind sponsors for tonight's program.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Peter Kelly of the National Association of Japan-America Societies, and congratulations to the Japan-America Society of St. Louis for hosting this program. There are 38 Japan-America societies all around the country. All of them are locally managed, locally funded, and their mission is to create opportunities for people-to-people relationships between Japanese and the United and Americans in their local areas. The National Association of Japan-America Societies exists to help that process by providing Japan-related programs to our members. And what you're seeing tonight is one of those. We offer programs in public affairs, security, youth exchange, business speakers, and cultural. This is our Geostrategy program, begun 2 years ago. And the attempt in this program is to provide Americans with an opportunity to hear the perspectives on the geostrategic challenges that Japan and the United States face in Asia. To do that, we have a speaker from experts from Japan and the United States, one from each, to discuss those issues in a conversational format with question and answer opportunities. This is the kind of conversation that happens frequently in Washington, D.C., but not so frequently outside. Our sponsor for the Geostrategy in the Grassroots series is the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan. We work in partnership with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation to encourage this kind of programming all around the country. This year, there are 8 of these Geostrategy in the Grassroots programs taking place in different cities all across the United States with different pairs of speakers in each one. The next program, assuming that tonight is sufficiently interesting for you to try again, the next program will be on December 10th, hosted by the Japan American Society of Michigan and Southwest Ontario. Please watch out for the introductions for them. This evening's speakers will be introduced by our moderator, Senator Talent, but they represent from both Japan and the United States, very distinguished and very experienced individuals who can give a perspective, their own and from a national point of view, of the very interesting and difficult challenges that both Japan and the United States face in Asia. We're very grateful to the speakers for joining us. We're grateful to our partner, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan, for helping us to sponsor this, and also to the Japan American Society of St. Louis for putting this program on.
Thank you, Peter. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's event, Senator Jim Talent. He's a St. Louis native and has over 30 years of political experience serving in both the Missouri and U.S. House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. In addition to his many legislative accomplishments, such as co-authoring the historic welfare reform bill, sponsoring legislation that helped to revitalize urban neighborhoods and lower healthcare costs, Senator Talent has a distinct interest in security issues and has served on both the House and Senate Armed Services Committees. So we couldn't have found a better moderator for tonight's discussion. Senator Talent, I turn it over to you.
Well, I thank you, Greg, and thanks to Peter Kelly, the National Japan American Society, and also the St. Louis Japan American Society for everything that you do for our area and the communities in our area, and especially for putting on this program. It's a real pleasure for me as a person who has remained involved in national security issues to be the moderator for this forum, which is going to involve two outstanding experts. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm sure your audience will as well. Now, Greg has told the audience how to ask questions, and I would encourage you, as you hear our two speakers and the questions I'm going to ask them, that as you have questions or points you want to make, to please let us know, because most of the question time is going to be reserved for questions from the audience. We want to know what you're interested in, what you think, and the issues about which you're concerned. Just a bit about the format. So I'm going to introduce our two distinguished guests in just a moment. I'll introduce them both at once. After that, we're going to have 45 minutes of question time. I'll take about 20 minutes asking some questions that I've prepared. And then we'll have most of the time for audience questions. So again, as you have questions, please submit them. And so I'm going to introduce our two distinguished panelists tonight, both outstanding scholars and former government officials in this area. I'll introduce them both at once. Our first is Dr. Ken Jimbo. Dr. Jimbo is a professor at the Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University. His main research fields are in international security, Japan-US security relations, Japanese foreign and defense policy, multilateral security in the Asia-Pacific, and regionalism in East Asia. He's been a policy advisor at various Japanese governmental commissions and research groups, including at the National Security Secretariat, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We're very pleased to have him this evening. And then our second guest is the Honorable Randall Schriver, who is the chairman of the board at the Project 2049 Institute. Most recently, Mr. Schriver served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs from January 2018 until the end of last year. He was the primary advisor to the Secretary of Defense on East Asian and Indo-Pacific affairs. Before that, Mr. Schriver served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and from 2001 until 2003, he was the Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So we'll go first to Professor Jimbo for such remarks as he may want to share with us. Please, Dr. Jimbo.
Well, thank you very much, Senator, for your very kind introduction. And good evening to honorable members of the Japan-America Societies in St. Louis. I only wish that I could attend the event in person. Nevertheless, it's good to be in touch with you online. And good morning to those who are viewing this event in Japan. It is my great honor to be invited today, together with Honorable Randy Schriver, known to all of you, who devoted great service to the U.S.-Japan Alliance past years as an Assistant Secretary of Defense. I also would like to recognize JAS St. Louis and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for making this great event possible. So I have 3 points to make regarding the global pandemic and its impact on geopolitics in Asia. It has obviously been the great game changer to the way of life for all of us since early this year. But to the extent of the impact on the international relations, the pandemic has rather accelerated the change of the geopolitics that has already begun before the pandemic broke out. So that involves the change of balance of power in Asia, strengthening of the authoritarian leaderships, and decline of democracy. That has been the trend for past nearly 2 decades, and exerting the economic statecraft policy, and that is the power to change the course of action through the economic means. And those have been, I think, the main features that has been accelerated by taking opportunity of response to the global pandemics. And the second point I wish to make is about China. And China obviously is the epicenter of the geopolitical concern in Asia. And we need to pay attention that China will achieve probably the earliest recovery from the COVID-19 in 2021, comparing with other G7 nations. So it is somewhat reminiscent to the post-Lehman shock crisis in 2008, when China began to advance more in obedient way its geopolitical intention abroad, and with a growing recognition that the power gap between the United States and China were bound to be filled. And presumably the same logic will apply probably most likely next year. So that geopolitical challenge in Asia that both Tokyo and Washington face today is ever expanding Chinese power to create so-called the anti-access and area denial capability, which is already posing an enormous cost for both U.S. Military and the Japanese self-defense force to achieve the operational access inside the theater, which is close within the so-called the first island chain in Western Pacific. So every doctrinal evolution of the U.S. military strategy in Asia has been and will be focusing on how the U.S., together with the allies, will prevail in so-called the A2AD environment. And I think this is the essence of our status quo management today, whether that is applied to Senkaku Islands, East China Sea, South China Sea, and also in the Korean Peninsula. But I think important things to note is that the status quo is essentially the dynamic concept. So you cannot really stay alone, but to make the status quo management possible. But I think that both sides need to constantly update what we're trying to deal with because it's a moving target, because China is rising, quite constantly. And the final third point I would like to make is addressing the U.S.-Japan alliance, which remains to be very robust and strong, even during the pandemic. And in past few months, for example, U.S. and Japanese military engaged in the series of joint military exercises, including the biannual Operation Keen Sword off the coast of Okinawa, joined in the Malabar naval exercise in the Bay of Bengal, together with India and Australia, and also so-called Pacific Vanguard exercise near Guam, together with Australia and Korea. So with a strong US-Japan alliance, it would create a more wider platform for other regional allies and partners to work together for the peace and stability in the region. So I'm particularly expecting so-called Quad mechanisms, combining US, Japan, Australia, and India will lead the process of developing joint visions, plans, operations, and capabilities, especially for securing stable maritime order in Asia. And I think our challenges are quite enormous, and would like to lead to be accelerated by the pandemic, as I mentioned. But I will bring the importance of the US-Japan alliance even more greater. And there will be, I think, lots of specific questions and talking points to be made. But I think I should leave it to the Q&A session. And I'll stop here and looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jimbo. And I'll just say, as an American former senator and public official, how encouraged I am at the influence that Japan has been exercising in the region. It's a tremendous stabilizing force, and I'm sure we'll get to additional questions about that when we get to the question and answer session. Secretary Schriver.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. And let me also add my thanks to the Japan American Societies, the national organization, as well as the St. Louis chapter, and to Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And I certainly agree with Professor Jimbo. It'd be nice to be in St. Louis. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do this in person at a future date. But for now, we'll carry on with this format. Even 17 minutes into this session, I've got more and more evidence of how close the US and Japan are, because I agree with just about everything Professor Jimbo said. In fact, I hope this isn't repetitive, because I would have made some of the same points, but I'll try to highlight some slightly different aspects of the same issues, because I think we see eye to eye, as almost always the case with our close alliance. But I think to talk about post-COVID environment, it is important to understand some of the trends that were unfolding pre-COVID and understand the trajectory we were on. You know, pre-COVID, the United States had already in our strategic documents identified China as a strategic competitor. We'd already put forward a national defense strategy that really made the China challenge the organizing principle for the entire defense enterprise, and started to resource that challenge in a much more serious way. We talked about tech competition and started to apply some of the economic tools, such as putting Chinese companies on the entities list, reforming our CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. So in our view, the competition was well underway, and we were starting to reorient and reposition for it. Another point pre-COVID I would make is that while certainly President Trump in style and in manner is quite different and unconventional and disruptive in some ways, I would state that for the most part, our China policy was more evolutionary than revolutionary. In other words, it was the Obama administration, remember, that had the pivot to Asia, or the rebalance, where they talked about 60% of our naval forces in the region. It was the Obama administration, and in particular Secretary Hagel at the Defense Department, that signed out the directive to look at the integrity of our supply chain and make sure that second and third tier suppliers were suppliers that we could have confidence in. And so when you get to the Trump administration, yes, a change in style and manner, but in a lot of ways carrying on the direction that had already been set by the Obama administration, and they had begun the process of putting us on a more competitive footing. And I think that's important to understand as we think about what might come post-COVID, is that this has been a more steady trajectory than this, even the dramatic change in style might otherwise have us believe. This is true of Japan as well. You know, we talked about our Indo-Pacific strategy. We referred to the free and open Indo-Pacific, and our Japanese friends would always rightfully point out, you know, it was Prime Minister Abe and Taro Aso and others who talked about a free and open Indo-Pacific well before the United States. So our friends in Japan also shared this view that preserving the free and open qualities of the region are of paramount importance, and that we need to reorient our alliance to be appropriate for things that could undermine the free and open qualities. One last point on pre-COVID US-Japan alliance. you know, we've got a very close alliance, a very deep and impressive history, but really this convergence over China has really accelerated some excellent alliance work in the past couple of years. In 2017, of course, we released our national defense strategy. In 2018, Japan released its revised national defense program guidelines. Each one of our strategic documents was very much informed by the other. We had input to Japan's document, they had input to ours. And so what we have are very complementary aligned visions. We see the strategic landscape the same way, the challenges in the same way. Our challenge leading into this era of COVID and beyond now has been, how do we implement these aligned views in ways that make for meaningful cooperation and position us optimally for this cooperation. So when we look at our acquisition strategy, we bring new capabilities online. How does the alliance evolve? When we think about that A2AD challenge, anti-access area denial challenge that Professor Jimbo mentioned, we're not leaving Japan, but we need to think about dispersal and diversification opportunities so that we can sustain a fight in an A2AD environment. And Japan needs to be a partner in that and be thinking along the same lines. So that's really our challenge going even beyond the COVID period. Now, just to make a couple of observations, and again, I don't want to repeat too much of what's already been said because I agree with it. COVID has been an accelerator, not an inflection point. An accelerator to the kind of work we're doing as an alliance and the kind of appreciation now we have for the strategic challenges. So I think China will remain that organizing principle, the pacing element, if you will, for our defense modernization and our alliance modernization efforts. But some of this starts to get very challenging as we bring new capabilities online, as we think about evolving doctrine, as we think about, as Japan introduces things like strike capability, as Japan thinks about what it means to be a proactive participant in regional security affairs. You know, we think a lot about the defense of Japan as an alliance, and we're starting to talk about things that are just beyond Japan, but certainly in its periphery, as its national security documents talk about. The US and Japan's role in potentially coming to Taiwan's assistance, if there were to be a contingency there, would be an example of that. So I think China will continue to be this organizing principle and the challenge of our time, and it will really define how we approach alliance modernization and effectiveness going forward. I think there's a number of hotspots that we need to keep an eye on. East China Sea has already been mentioned, and the Senkaku Islands. But I do think Taiwan is getting more dangerous for a lot of reasons. And that if you pull out a map, and I know our Japanese friends understand this even better than American friends, if you think about the loss of Taiwan, it gets very difficult to defend the Ryukyu Island chain, Okinawa, and the waterways around that area. It gets difficult to think about upholding the international qualities of the South China Sea, even out to the second island chain in Oceania. Taiwan really is key strategic ground, and it's in our interest to preserve its de facto independent status, and see that Taiwan remains in the group of democracies that care about a free and open Indo-Pacific. So we think about the East China Sea, we think about Taiwan, we'll have to think about the Korean Peninsula. It's not uncommon for Pyongyang to send an early test to a new leader. And we've got two new leaders in this case, a relatively new still Prime Minister Suga and a soon-to-be President Biden. So we'll have to keep an eye on the peninsula and not let our guard down, even as we think more expansively and broadly about alliance missions. And then I was going to make a similar point to Professor Jimbo about how we bring others along, how we operationalize the Quad, how we think about making that cooperation meaningful. You know, for me, the Quad was born on December 26, 2004, the date of the great South Asia earthquake and tsunami. And these were the four countries that came together because they had the capability, the political will, the values to see the humanitarian disaster and want to respond. But beyond 2004, it's really been slow in coming to make it a meaningful organizing grouping to do things in the region. We're starting to see more and more, Professor Jimbo mentioned the Malabar exercise. To the untrained eye, that looked an awful lot like a Quad because we had the four countries participating. But even a Quad, I think, is insufficient. South Korea has not come alongside us as we look at the China challenge for a lot of reasons. They think, of course, primarily about their own peninsula and the challenge from North Korea and the need to keep China as constructive in that problem set as possible. But for us, the strategic challenge, as far as the eye can see, is going to be the China challenge. We need South Korea to be a participant in upholding the free and open Indo-Pacific. We need to think about emerging partners. Vietnam, for example, not an ally, but a country where the United States surprisingly polls 94% favorable as a country in Vietnam. And when you think about how recent our conflict was with them, that is quite remarkable. How do we bring these other countries along? Because this is a challenge that will require all countries that value sovereignty, value the free and open qualities in the Indo-Pacific to be participants in some manner, wherever their capabilities might have them be in terms of participation. So again, I'm really delighted to be part of this discussion, honored to share the virtual podium with Professor Jimbo and Senator Talent, and I look forward to the follow-on discussion.
Thank you, Secretary Schriver. You've raised a lot of interesting issues, and we're going to get to them. I would remind the audience, if you have questions, please ask them. And I want to get to, we're going to get to the security questions in just a minute or two. Secretary Schriver, you mentioned the Quad. Just before I get to the first question, which is going to be an internal question relating to Japan's handling of COVID, take 30 seconds and explain what the Quad is for those of our viewers who may not know. I'm sure most of our viewers probably do, but just take a minute and explain what that is.
Sure. The Quad is a grouping of 4 countries, the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, that, as I said, did come together in one of the most important events in the Bush administration that I served in, the response to the tsunami in December 2004. And the idea has been these countries share values, share interests, and have these capabilities. Shouldn't these 4 countries as a grouping do more together? And it's been very slow to operationalize it for many reasons. At various times, Australia was reluctant. Even the US was reluctant at one time, and now India has been slower to come along. We've done better on the State Department Foreign Ministry side. We've had ministerial level discussions now at least twice and talk about how we can coordinate development assistance. We'd like to see more on the security side and talk about how to operationalize that grouping in more meaningful ways.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm just going to take a minute and ask a question that's not exactly security related, but many of our American viewers are going to be curious because Japan has a reputation internationally for having handled the COVID pandemic extremely well. I'm sure many of our viewers, particularly those in America, will be interested in what you all think the key to that was, and how the Japanese public views their government's handling of this. So perhaps, and all of my questions are to both of you, but perhaps Dr. Jimbo might begin. What's the key to how the Japanese government's handled this, and how does the Japanese public view it?
Well, thank you for asking this. And I think early phase of the COVID spreads since March to July this year, I think that together with other countries that there has been a significant level of the societal unrest. And also there has been the growing doubts about the society, how governments handle those questions, because we had a specific cases like how to deal with Diamond Princess, the cluster issues, and also the cancellation of the 2020 Olympic this year, postponing to the 2021. So that the societal psyche over handling of the COVID was not as positive as, viewers may seem to have. But I think that we have developed our way to handle by introducing the expertise of the health specialist especially to have a so-called the Japan model, which is to have a cluster busting to trace those infections, to have the connected data to actually make it the targeting of the medical treatments more systematically than I think just to offer the general PCR testing. I think that had worked quite significantly in the early phase of containing the wider spread of the COVID in Japan. And I think since this fall, since September, there has been a new phase that Japan has adopted, how to revitalize the economy while managing the COVID spread, maintaining the infection level controllable to the medical treatment. And I think that has done for a couple of months so far, but there has been a lingering concern that there has been the second or third wave that has been emerging right now. So I think it's all up to how we can really overcome this winter, and all the vaccines access might change the situation. And if we are able to decide to have the Olympic next year, opening up all the airports and the people's movements feeling in Japan, adopting a kind of new kind of societal regulations, and introducing all the datas to trace and knowing all the kind of tracement, the tracking systems, that could be the potential that we can really create the new standards of having the transaction of the people. And I think the Olympic will be huge milestones, and we'll see how it's going to play out in the next few months.
So I hear you. So the Japanese people are going to expect the Olympics to go on, and the new prime minister, I'm sure, is tending to that. Secretary Schriver, I don't know whether you want to add a word or two, or do you want me to go right to the next question? It sounds like you're satisfied. Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I think that was an excellent answer and covered the bases there.
Okay. So I've got a couple of questions relating to economics, but of course that has a lot to do with security. How do you expect American trade policy in East Asia to change, if at all, under the Biden administration? Should an attempt be made to revive TPP or something like it? How is that going to affect the security situation? What's this interrelationship between U.S. trade policy and security in East Asia? Now, whoever wants to go first, just jump on it.
Sure, I'll jump in first. So I think President-elect Biden has already made some comments about not rolling back the China tariffs and various steps that have been taken with respect to the entities list, certain companies being put on the entities list, certain sanctions. So I think we can expect continuity there. The question about rejoining TPP, I supported TPP. I said so at my confirmation hearing. I suppose putting myself somewhat at risk with my own administration I was joining. But it's clear politics have changed on this. 2015, 2016. Remember, it wasn't just President or then candidate Trump. It was both parties, both candidates, Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump opposing TPP and really I think in a lot of ways, changing the dynamics of trade and the politics of trade in the U.S. for some time to come. So I think it'll be very difficult, particularly for a new Democrat administration, to come in and say, we want to undertake some major trade liberalizations in a large multilateral forum like the TPP would be. I do think there's plenty of work to be done on minilateral or bilateral. I suppose even FTAs, the brand is not so good these days. People have sort of a negative view of free trade agreements. But remember, we seek trade liberalization to open other markets, not really to open. Ours remains a very open market by international standards, Trump tariffs notwithstanding. We're still, a top 15 or maybe even top 10 in terms of openness. And so, we have major trading partners that there's huge volumes that are still subject to tariffs and barriers, and we can benefit from trade liberalization. I just think it'll be on a more narrow basis, bilateral or minilateral. And then I do think you weave into that some of the ongoing tech competition with China and some of the opportunities that will create. The US and Japan can be partners on clean networks, clean pathways. We can bring others into that. And that's a form of not trade liberalization, but it's a form of strengthening our economic ties that'll bind us in ways that also will help us on the security side.
May I jump in here?
Oh, absolutely, please.
Sure. I think as Secretary Schriver has mentioned that in past 4 years, United States is increasingly determined to pursue the comprehensive strategic competition with China. And I think for Japan, we are quite comfortable and confident that we are able to line up with the United States in the strategic competition in the geopolitical security domain. But in terms of the security, I think that there has been the nuanced voices from Tokyo, which I'd like to highlight here. And I think Japan and US shares the basic notion that Japan needs to, asking China to have a robust reform of its economic system to be more rule-based and fair and transparent. And I think the METI and also the newly established economic section at the National Security Secretariat have been working on tightening the regulations on the export control, especially on the sensitive technologies. And I think they are also considering, as Randy mentioned, that how to join in the blue dot networks and clean networks, especially encompassing the digital economy in both nations. But I think in terms of the business interests, if you go to Keidanren, Business Association Japan and METI, I think they will emphasize how deeply engaged we are in the Chinese market. And I think that for Japan, China is still the core part of the supply chain, especially for the Japanese manufacturing companies, so that we are able to diversify the FDI destination. But that will only happen if those business leaders think that is the optimum choices to go outside China, and not truly by the government request of the subsidies. So it is hard to imagine that the Japanese business community is in favor of so-called the economic decoupling with China. So that I think that we are trying to have both ways. While that strategic competition, is as conceptually very important, but we need to have a kind of alternative way of the rulemaking. That's why I think Japan decided to go on with a TPP, even without the United States, expecting the future US, joining the process in the future. And then also we have just come up with, the trade framework called the RCEP, which is the ASEAN Plus 5 networks. Unfortunately, India was not really part of it, but that also create that kind of, the trade and investment framework that involves China to, be part of the process of the standardization of the business environment. And what is significant is that it is the first time that the Japan, China, and Korea both all agree with the free trade framework. That will also be accelerators of how those kind of the standardization talks with including those China are the part of those discussion. And I hope that the U.S. appreciate what the Japan has been doing, all those kind of things. So that the competition on one hand, but I think that the maintaining the interface on the other would be, I think, a very important strategy to be pursued.
Yeah, we're under similar pressure from our own business community, and I think one of the words and terms that's kind of been maybe misused a little bit is this term decoupling, because it does imply a real separation of our economic interests and business interests. And what I think is more appropriate and probably more likely is a very targeted decoupling by particular sectors. I think it makes all the sense in the world for us to decouple when it comes to rare earth, for example. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, I think that we've learned some lessons recently. And of course, the Chinese probably didn't help themselves when they sent a spokesperson to the podium and threatened to cut off pharmaceuticals during a pandemic. So I think what any administration, Republican or Democrat, would want to continue to do is really the smart targeted decoupling. that really does secure the integrity of our supply chains in critical areas. But complete decoupling is not realistic. It's probably not even desirable. I mean, this is still a market of 1.4 billion people that we really don't want to turn our backs completely on.
A follow-up question for you, Dr. Jimbo, because Randy mentioned decoupling. So do Japanese business people see the prospect of America decoupling to some extent from China as an opportunity, as a threat, or as something in between? How do they approach that, or are they still trying to adjust to the idea?
Well, I think that there has been the emerging business sectors in the industrial areas that needs the special attention with the connection between the high-tech industries and sensitive sectors on the security and the military domains. And those are all dual-use technologies, either on the AIs and semiconductors, quantum technologies, and all things are the essential component of the newly emerging technologies in coming years. So we do fully understand that those have to be carefully crafted, going beyond those kind of only with business interests. But I think that, we are still in the traditional sectors. Toyota has been investing to the Chinese market a lot, and we are expecting a more market growth in China in the coming decades. And then those are very hard to be decoupled. So I think it is very neat. I like the, Randy mentioned that the smart targeted decoupling is a concept to be pursued, because we need to have the interface with the Chinese economy for the, the well-being of the Japanese economy itself. That is very important for the alliance. But at the same time that we really need to craft what will be the sensitive sectors that the Japan and US need to work on. Randy mentioned about the clean networks, and especially that will be applied to the 5G networks, and also those kind of how to protect the critical infrastructures of the potential kind of intervention by any kinds of the harmful the government intervening activities in the government, and those have to be considered as a very important strategic tool. So that I think that it's very hard to respond in general, but basically that the business community is heavily embedded in the Chinese market, but we are growing to be more sensitive about how to restrict ourselves, especially in the sensitive sector.
And thank you for that. And it's really encouraging. I'd encourage your viewers to be hopeful about the future as these two great democracies and allies try to work out how to balance these considerations. And this I hear from everybody on both sides, how to do what we need to do to protect our security from what can only be described as a challenge from China, but also while protecting our economic interests. And Secretary Schriver mentioned that we're in an interesting situation because we're going to have two new leaders, one already in place in Japan, but still new, and another coming to the United States. So my question for you all, and take plenty of time to answer it. I only have one more after this I really want to get to, and we still have a little time. And I would encourage the audience again to ask to send us your questions as you have them listening to this. So okay, I'm going to throw you out the big general question. So how do you think the Biden administration will change the Trump policies regarding the American-Japanese relationship, particularly with regard to the challenge from China, but generally speaking, what is the new president going to do? How is he going to recalibrate, which they're talking about doing? What does that really mean? And then for both of you, what about Prime Minister Suga? I mean, he's a very well-known political figure in Japan particularly. I think a little bit less well-known around the world. We expect him to continue the policies of Prime Minister Abe, but I think he's identified most with the domestic policies. So what different approach might he bring to Japan's security and foreign policy? What does it mean, a subject that interests me in particular, in terms of the general trend towards strengthening Japanese defenses? Is he on board with that? So I'll let you two loose. Please offer your opinions about both new leaders and their approaches. Who would like to go first?
Well, I can start, and I'll say less about Prime Minister Suga and more about President-elect Biden. Look, I made the point about the policy toward China and the Indo-Pacific being more evolutionary than revolutionary, because I think there's going to be more continuity than the difference in style might otherwise suggest. And the president-elect has already commented, as I said, on some of the economic policies, not rolling back the China tariffs or the phase one trade deal. But I do think there's a couple of things that can change rather quickly. Tone and language and things like that, I think, will change very quickly. And I think to the extent that impacts the overall environment and creates space for more cooperation with China and perhaps even more cooperation with allies, that could be a positive thing. I do think the Biden administration is going to want to find some sort of flagship bilateral issue they can cooperate on with China. And you know, I think if you look at the Trump administration, one of the criticism is there's no ballast in the relationship. You have nothing positive going on. It's all confrontation and competition. And the Biden folks have talked about climate change, and they've talked about maybe approaching something like the Iran deal again, maybe Afghanistan if the drawdown continues and China's got interest there. But I think the point is they'll want some positive bilateral initiative with the Chinese. And then they've talked a lot about bringing allies along more. Again, their critique of the Trump administration is you've been more confrontational with China and emphasized competition, but this sort of America first mentality, you haven't always brought allies into the fold. I suspect they're going to arrive and find many of these alliances in better shape than their campaign rhetoric might have suggested. I think we have a very strong alliance with Japan, excellent cooperation on the Korean Peninsula. Japan plays host to our forces that are helping to interdict the attempts at sanctions invasion. Very positive cooperation, as I said, on reorienting our defense enterprises to the China challenge. Yes, there are issues like the burden sharing issue where I think the president is out of step with sort of historical norms. Perhaps that's some low-hanging fruit for the Biden administration. They can, not ask for 5 times the amount we've gotten in previous years, but bring that into a number that closes the gap more quickly. That's possible. But again, I think they're going to find these alliances are in a little better shape than their campaign rhetoric suggested. So I think they'll be pleased when they see that and want to continue things there as well. Prime Minister Suga, you're right, Senator, maybe less known outside of Washington, but we did host him at the Pentagon when he was still Chief Cabinet Secretary on one of his Washington visits, and had very good discussions with him, as I understand happened at other agencies as he made his way around town. I think we largely expect continuity, but I think this domestic focus, to get really into some inside baseball, there's some basing and realignment issues. Prime Minister Suga, as Chief Cabinet Secretary, paid a lot of attention to those issues because, of course, those issues are local domestic politics and impact diet elections and local elections. So I don't expect those issues are going to get easier under Prime Minister Suga, who's really paid a lot of attention to those issues over the past few years. But they're important issues to work out. We have to be aligned with Japan because, after all, our forces are in their country. So we have to do things in a way that our Japanese allies see as beneficial to them. So, but I'll say less on that subject and look forward to Dr. Jimbo's remarks.
And it's always difficult to follow a towering figure.
Yes, one of the keys in politics is to choose your predecessor well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Professor or Dr. Jimbo, please give us your opinion.
Thank you. First on, President-elect Biden and his expected administrative approaches to the alliance. And I think I do agree with Secretary Schriver that I think one might need to focus on the continuity expanding from Obama administration to Trump administration, and you know, the incoming administration over the policy of U.S. Military engagement in Asia. Randy mentioned about the 2018 NDS and the National Defense Program guideline has been well coordinated between Tokyo and Washington. But even before that, back in 2014-15 timeframe, that we have come up with a U.S.-Japan Defense Cooperation guideline, and that we have agreed upon how that both countries can achieve so-called a seamless response to the all phases of the conflict, and which has been, you know, created the high level of the integrations of our views and operations in managing the alliance. That already happened during the Obama administration, and we are quite comfortable with the Obama administration's policy on the rebalance and pivot, and I think we are fully ready to deal with the Biden administration in coming months and years. And I think what we expect to have is the not at like a transactional approaches that sometimes the Trump administration tried to take on the alliance issues, but more on the kind of accumulative win-win types of you know, policy coordination between two sides. For example, that we are fully conscious about how Japan should take more roles, responsibilities in the region, having more partnership with regional neighbors, and you know, taking a more like indigenous responsibility, especially on the, you know, low end types of the operation by ourselves. So we're happy to do that, and we are happy to extend our, you know, defense cooperation with the regional partners. But it is very hard for Japan to replace the role of the United States, especially on the high end issues. For example, Japan-Philippine relationship. We have, you know, just achieved so-called the military equipment transfer to Philippines. We are able to sell the radar system to Philippines. That is a great achievement we had. And there has been a message to be received in Tokyo that the Philippines expect more to come from Tokyo. But basically our response is that we are not the enabler to replace the role of the United States. And if the United States commit quite rigidly to the regional partners, our approach to the regional, those allies and partnership will be even accelerated. So those types of the architectural understandings, U.S. as a platform and the regional partner will, you know, upgrade its internal dynamics of the security cooperation is something that I will expect from the Biden administration to proceed forward. So this is my comment on Biden administration. And then back to the Suga administration, and I think Senator Talent is right. I mean, Suga is very well-known politician in Japan, but less known on the foreign policy fields. And he served nearly 8 years, 7 years and 8 months as a chief cabinet secretary under the Prime Minister Abe. So he was involved in the key policy decisions, and he has been, you know, masterful handling of how to deal with interagency coordination of the bureaucrats. So he knows the Japanese politics well. He knows the bureaucracy very well. He has been the kind of the headquarter of the coordination issues. So if
Dr.
I could...
Let me interrupt for just a moment, because when you're done, I want to flag Greg Gorman. We're going to go to audience questions. So, and Greg's going to read them. So please take your time, finish your answer, but I wanted Greg to have the opportunity to get the questions ready. So please.
Sure, of course, I'll finish in 1 minute. I think
take your time. I didn't shorten you.
Sure, of course. So if you quote like, you know, if the foreign policy begins at home types of the perception, that I think Suga has been fitted quite well, that he can handle domestically to make the foreign policy robust. That has been the potential kind of capability that the Suga administration may have. But things that you know, found as an early indicator of what the Suga administration wish to have is a quite kind of, you know, continuation of the Abe administration, promoting of the U.S.-Japan alliance as a platform, promotion of the FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific concept, and try to reach out with Russia and China to manage the, the relationship. And then he's ready to meet with, Chairman Kim Jong-un for the bilateral talks. Those are the list of the foreign policy agendas as he has drafted so far. But there has not been a so significant indicators which are actually the priorities that Suga wish to achieve on this front. And so something that I found is that increasing difficulty to achieve a dual track agenda, which is the improvement of the Japan-China relationship, while that we'll have a robust US-Japan security relationship. Because once that those kind of zero-sum issues may arise between US and China, Japanese strategic position will be much more squeezed and then require us to make a more decisive choice between particular issues. Will Suga administration able to make such kind of tremendous decision, which is unknown, because I think Japanese government is still aiming to invite the President Xi Jinping to Japan sometime next year. That is considered to be a very important kind of policy coordination we have. And that will also bring Japan to have more like a reluctant psyche over making a provocative kind of decision-making over anything to provoke China. So I think we are very much nuanced in that sense. So I think those are the major kind of issues under the radar scheme of the Suga administrations, and so many things to come. On the defense, one of the Prime Minister Abe's carry-on message was the installation of the Aegis Ashore, back in June. Prime Minister Abe wished to have, come up with a rigid plan to replace the Aegis Ashore missile defense system, together with a new kind of defense orientation that might involve the SDF's strike capability, which is, I think, a tremendous shift from the post-war Japanese politics. But what has indicated by the Prime Minister's office was that I think they will postpone those kind of decision for the further consideration, because they are not really ready to come up with the integrated kind of defense orientation, how those kind of new capability might entail. So I think this is the current snapshots of what they are getting at on the foreign and security policy in Japan.
Thank you both very much. That was fascinating, and I'm going to yield the floor to Greg Gorman, who is going to read our audience questions. Greg.
Thank you, everyone. This has been fascinating discussion. We do have a number of questions that have come through. I'd like to start with the first question from the Honorary Council of Japan here in St. Louis, Stephen Knapp. And it's clear to him that based on the conversation that we've gone through, that it's the relationship between Japan and the United States is very strong, and it's very important. And his question is about the new administrations and how they're going to impact that existing relationship. And it's also a question about the personal aspect of personal diplomacy. And so we've gone through a period where it was very visible with personal diplomacy between the Trump and Abe. Do you see that continuing with the new administrations?
I think time will tell. I think it's always good if a personal relationship and personal rapport can be established. But our ties with Japan are so deep and broad. Even if there's not personal chemistry between the leaders, I have every confidence that we'll continue to work well as an alliance and even strengthen our alliance. There's one thing I meant to mention in the previous answer that I failed to, and I'll fold it in here. The other thing about the incoming administration is they'll probably have greatly reduced resources. And if you recall, one of the criticisms of the pivot or the rebalance was you're talking a big game in Asia, but you're not bringing the resources to really fully implement that vision. So the Biden administration, if the idea is continuity, compete well with China, preserve the free and open Indo-Pacific, strengthen alliances, they may have to be doing that in an environment with less resources, particularly on the defense side. And that can be challenging because that can call into question your credibility. Can you actually back up the statements and commitments you're making? So on the one hand, the Biden administration might be able to sweep away one of these annoying irritant issues like the burden sharing question. But on the other hand, if the first defense budget is a huge slash, all our security partners in Asia might scratch their heads a bit and think, is the U.S. able to really back up all these commitments that they're continuing to make? So that's something to keep an eye on.
Well, I think Prime Minister Abe has recently responded in the interview how he dealt with President Trump, and it was fascinating that he had his own instinct that the personal relationship and trust will become a very essential part of managing the relationship, and I think he did quite well from the beginning of the launching of the Trump administration. But I think the Biden administration seems to be more systematic than the current administration in terms of hiring people, appointing those professionals to the, each of the existing branches, and the role played by the senior leaders at, the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs may play even the greater roles in management of the alliance, which is, I think, quite good in a way, making those management of the alliance more professional. And those are, I think, a very important aspect. I don't think the Prime Minister Suga will play golf or, having those kind of intimate personal relationship with President-elect Biden. But I think at the level of the professionalisms among those circles managing the U.S.-Japan alliance, and I think the confidence level has already been high, and I think that will continue to be the case in coming months and years.
So the next question that we have, and this, I'm actually going to combine a couple of different questions that we've come across. And it's an image that with the Democratic administration coming in the United States, with the Biden administration, will have a much more of a focus on climate change as well as human rights. And so in your opinions, do you see the security issues being sacrificed to human right preferences or to climate preferences? Maybe first we'll start with Secretary Schriver again.
I think the questioner has rightfully identified the priorities of the incoming administration. I do think you can pursue those interests without sacrificing security issues, but we know if your interlocutor is China, they'll be looking for trade-offs and promises of their cooperation and reaching agreements. There's always strings attached, and they'll want the U.S. to do certain things. Could be related to Taiwan, could be related to activities in the South China Sea or East China Sea. So we'll just have to be able to stand our ground when it comes to negotiations. If you believe climate change represents, this kind of existential challenge, we shouldn't have to be able to, we shouldn't need to trade anything for it. If the Chinese shared that view, we should be able to get their cooperation if they see it similarly. I think the Trump administration didn't exactly ignore either of these issues. Yes, we pulled out of Paris and didn't talk about it as much, but our emissions are coming way down, and the Department of Defense still talked about climate change in all our strategic documents because DoD is an agency that has to live with objective reality. If your basic quadrillion is going underwater, you got to do something about it. If the Arctic is melting, you got to do something about it. And even on human rights, we took unprecedented steps on sanctioning Chinese officials who were involved in the Hong Kong national security legislation. We sanctioned officials that are involved in the concentration camps in Xinjiang and companies that are involved in the creation of the surveillance state there. So I think it may be more on human rights, maybe more of a tonal change at top than a real change. And just one last point on that, if there is a change, it may not come so directly on China or some of the obvious issues like North Korea. It may actually come into places like the Philippines or Indonesia, whereas we found a way to continue to work with the armed forces of the Philippines by arguing they weren't involved in the extrajudicial killings going on related to the drug war. We got Kopassus off the blacklist in Indonesia that were previously prohibited from exercising with because of past human rights abuses in previous decades. Now, if they introduce human rights in that way and start to impact the relationships with other allies and emerging partners, that could impact security issues. So I think it's, in some cases, a matter of nuance and tone, and in other cases, it could have an impact.
If you don't mind, I will move on to another question that will be directed to Secretary Schriver. And this is, I apologize, it's in Japanese, and I think it's Mr. Abe is the person who's asking this question. You know, we talk about Taiwan a lot, but his basic question is, do you think, to what extent does the Biden administration understand the strategic importance of Taiwan that you have talked about in this, and how to what level will they, you know, place importance on Taiwan?
Well, there are certain people that I think if they go into the right jobs, you'll see a lot of continuity. There are people on the Democrat side who have very strong records on supporting U.S.-Taiwan relations and supporting Taiwan. People like Kurt Campbell, Eli Ratner, Derek Mitchell, and you know, these are people that Dr. Jimbo knows as well as I do. But historically, I think the Trump administration can accurately say we've done more to strengthen that relationship and done more for Taiwan in terms of arms sales, normalizing the arms sales process, higher level visits, sending flag officers, cabinet officers, supporting Taiwan on trade issues. We just created a new strategic economic dialogue. So that's a pretty high bar. So if there's a pause or some, I guess pause is the word I would use, on some of that momentum as they seek to maybe create a climate change initiative with China, it wouldn't surprise me. We just got to hope that it's a pause only and not an inflection point and a shift back to the way business was done previously.
Greg, could I jump in? Because this was the question I wanted to ask that I didn't get to ask.
Go ahead.
And we're doing okay on time, but I'd like to ask Dr. Jimbo for his views on how the Japanese government views the strategic importance of Taiwan. What kind of priority under the new prime minister would support for Taiwan be? I think the relationship between the two countries has been growing warmer and closer, but how do you foresee that going? If you don't mind, Greg, I'd be fascinated by what Dr. Jimbo says.
Well, as Secretary Schriver mentioned at the outset, Taiwan's strategic location, geostrategic importance is quite important for Japan. So I guess that maintaining the status quo of the Taiwan is I think, extremely important for the Japanese strategic calculations. And I think in order to maintain the status quo, because of the change of the power balance in the Taiwan Straits, there will be more, I think, resources to be allocated on our policy on Taiwan. So that's the general remarks that I have. And also on the Japan-Taiwan relationship, that has a special kind of orientations. And we do have a very, I think, friendly relationship. And also whenever the societal kind of exchanges are concerned, our level of the intimacy between Japan and Taiwan is so high. And thirdly, that we are generally kind of upgrading our official relationship, and especially on the level of the official visit that we have with Taiwan, and also the economic representative office, and also that level of the the diplomats and the ex-military officials that all involve in the virtual strategic dialogues between Japan and Taiwan as well. So that I think that what to be pursued is the kind of functional and the practical upgrade of our strategic relationship by having more like information sharing between two sides. And when we talk about air operations and underwater operations in the East China Sea, obviously there should be the Taiwan that will be practically involved in coordinating policy how to deal with China. We cannot do it officially, but I think in the way that we can have interactive communication with Taiwan, those are to be achieved. But that needs to have a very careful steps, because there's always the big tiger is behind, and we are also being able to try to achieve how to improve the relation with the mainland as well. So those are, I think, a basic approach that we have on Taiwan at this moment.
Thank you, Greg, for letting me interrupt there. Thank you.
No, I have another question from one of our members, Shinpei Ogiso. And his question, I think that probably the first part should be addressed to Dr. Jimbo, but he's concerned about COVID and how to counter the emerging China military power. How does he view the Japanese Ministry of Defense budget needs? And because of the severe situation from COVID, has that impacted the budget there? Will Japan be able to keep securing enough defense budget along with the COVID-19 situation?
Well, I think that not only limited to Japan, but every major states have been I think spending so much money on the how to deal with COVID, and also the subsidies and economic boosting stimulus that have achieved, so that 2021-22 will be a very tough year for the fiscal side of the arrangements. But I think that, in terms of how to deal with the defense budget, I think there has been the moderate but the constant, I think, increase of the Japanese defense budget, but because we really need to invest on the new technologies and, the requirements of defense reforms. And we don't know how, I think that Secretary Schriver may have a more precise viewpoint, but there has been also how to deal with the US forces in Japan expense issues. And I hope that these kind of arrangements could be arranged in a more positive manner, invest on the future needs of the US-Japan alliance rather than the arrangement how to deal with the basing issues and so on. Because, Randy mentioned about the dispersal option and diversification. Those are greatly required for having a more resilient US-Japan platforms that need additional investments on the airports, ports, and communication mechanisms, and the network mechanism, satellites, and all beyond. So that there are so many things that we really need to spend our money on this, but in a more efficient manner to strengthen our alliance. And I think the Japanese government is ready to allocate those budget, because that is truly required for our strategic needs.
So the follow-up question that he has, Mr. Ogiso had, is, and I think this is for both the panelists, do you see any other concerns for China to see this pandemic as a good time to expand their power? And you had mentioned the A2AD strategy. Is this an opportunity for China? How do you view that as a potential risk?
I think Secretary Schriver can go ahead.
Yeah, what we're already seeing is a perceptions management campaign on the part of China. There's different terms of art, political warfare or information warfare, but they're definitely casting themselves as the great success story of beating the virus, and the United States as being incompetent and unable to deal with the pandemic. I'll leave it to attendees to decide how accurate those statements are, but they are trying to leverage this messaging, particularly in the region, to cast China as a more reliable, stronger partner down the road. And they're coupling that with their Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives. They do a very good job of weaving in strategic messaging in a way that we sometimes struggle with. So we're already seeing it. The other thing we're seeing is there is a bit of adventurism in their foreign policy. We've had a major dust up on the border with India. That's the second major dust up in 3 years. We're seeing a lot more activity around Taiwan, aircraft crossing the center line and bombers circumventing the entire island. We're seeing more or sustained activity in the East China Sea. Sometimes people take their eyes off that, but a very steady rate of incursions into the Senkaku area, and more shadowing and harassment in the South China Sea. So if that's COVID related, either a mechanism to divert public attention from domestic issues and not criticize the regime, but rather promote nationalism, or if it's they see a window of opportunity, either way, we have to deal with that behavior and those outcomes. So it's a good question. It's certainly something to keep an eye on, particularly if we struggle through the next few months, which it unfortunately looks like we're gonna be doing here in the U.S.
Okay, Dr. Jimbo. I think it's reached the allotted time. We're at 8:15. We do have plenty of more questions. It was a very stimulating discussion tonight, and I thank our speakers tonight. Thank you so much. I think everyone, please put your virtual hands together for a very interesting discussion. We appreciate the audience's questions as well, and we'll be sending out a thank you note and directions to our website where this we actually will have a recording of the session this evening. So that'll be stored on our website, so you're welcome to go take a look at that. In this email that we send out, we'll also be sending a link out for any donations. Anything that you can contribute would be greatly appreciated to support the activities we do with the Japan America Society.